Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for some have entertained angels unawares. Here we are in the middle of London, in the middle of the day on this Sunday, and we're celebrating a ritual of hospitality that's largely unknown by the majority of the population in the UK who live their lives without reference to organised religion. We're gathered to share the Eucharist, this ritual meal with singing and prayers, bread, wine and community. The gates are open, anyone can come and share bread and wine together. For any who do this regularly, it might feel like quite an ordinary thing to do, but really it's not. And I'm speaking now for a few minutes, but who to? Some of us are gathered in this courtyard, we're online too. You intend now anyway, to stay, perhaps even to the end of the service. Others are walking past and will catch a word or two, maybe curious about this ritual, this music, this food, or not. We're taking part this morning in a pop-up banquet for the church, deeply embedded in the common expression of faith, hope, and love in the life of Christ. But for most, this kind of gathering might evoke everything on a spectrum from curiosity to indifference to even hostility. The church is used to being a host, inviting people into a building to share a meal or to come to a service or a gathering of some sort. Churches are used to that role of convening, gathering, and hosting. But today we're out here, and so we as a congregation have moved somewhat from being a host to being a guest, to be a guest of the city. That's why it's important to do this from time to time. To be in another space, to feel at once both liberated in the open air, perhaps, and maybe a bit uncomfortable. Out here, we're guests of the city. A meal to which everyone is invited to share food is a vision of heaven, a vision of the world as it could be, that's at the very heart of the distinctive teaching and stories of Jesus. And this first century teacher really knew what he was doing, telling stories about hospitality, because it evokes strong feelings and raises proper challenges to the way we live. Because we know that alongside being an exchange of generosity or kindness, a human interaction of hospitality is also an exchange of power. It gets to the root of some of our deepest insecurities and sometimes even our most judgmental instincts. So Jesus knew what he was talking about. He knew he would touch an emotional nerve when he told so many stories about either being a host or a guest and about eating together. You remember he told stories of everyone's worst nightmare, inviting people to a party you're throwing and then not one person turning up. He told a story of a man going to a party dressed in all the wrong clothes. He told stories of invitations being issued to total strangers to join a wedding. And one party I've sometimes imagined with a bit of a shiver is the party that father throws for his prodigal son when he gets home. Can you imagine being the son at that party, having lost all your family's money, with everyone knowing what you've done, feeling ashamed despite the welcome back you've received, yet being the center of attention at a lavish gathering that your parents insist you've attended? This theme of being a guest or being a host touches on deep emotional instincts. When you invite people, says Jesus, and even with that phrase, the whole subject opens up. When you invite people, he says in today's gospel, you're opening yourself to others' assessment to some degree. You open yourself to others seeing how your space is, how much space you have, how you have arranged it, what your relationships are like, especially your intimate relationships, how you live alone, for instance. Inviting anyone else into our space, however small or big that is, can touch very deep themes of pride and shame and guilt and desire. It's also said, and maybe these patterns are adjusting after the pandemic, it's said that Londoners are much more prepared to travel on the tube for half an hour, to have a meal with people who agree with them, rather than attempt to eat with their actual neighbours. Hospitality is, in contemporary London, for those who have a home, very often exercised differently, meeting in neutral spaces, in coffee shops, bars and the park, or even a church. And of course, the commonplace is that at the end of a conversation, if a Londoner says, "Let's have lunch," what they really mean is, "Goodbye." But hospitality is at the heart of all we are and do as a church, because it's our main way of relating to one another in this Eucharist, this holy meal, offered without strings. Whether you take communion or not, you are very welcome. The point is that you are invited. You are invited as I am invited. So our decision really is whether to say yes, whether we can say yes. Why did Jesus tell so many stories about meals and banquets and parties? I think because it tells us something really fundamental about the nature of God that is at once very beautiful and very challenging. The prophetic theme underneath Jesus' stories about meals is that the invitation is for you. Whoever you are, whatever you've done, whatever you eat or not, however much money you have or worries you carry, you are invited as you are, so that God can make you who you can be. And I don't so much mean invited to a church service, although that's some of how it works out in real life. Amongst other things, I mean a profound invitation to live, interdependent with all that lives in God's creation. An invitation that, if we really understood what it meant, would be to us both irresistible and profoundly challenging. This gospel we heard this morning is in a specific context and is Jesus at his most challenging, because he's talking to a group of lawyers and religious leaders. He's talking to people with power and challenging the fundamental ethic of a Hellenistic, that is Greek, culture that was prevalent in his day. This ethic of hospitality was, in Latin, do ut des. That is, I give in order that you may give. A reciprocal arrangement where one invitation expects another in return, and the same people would find each other at the same parties. Do ut des. I give in order that you may give. That could be a reciprocal ethic, a rather attractive one. But in the wrong hands becomes a closed system of hospitality that's recognizable to any of us with a friendship group or set of work relationships. It's a key principle of society today in some ways. Expectations are set, of course, between and within groups who invite each other, and it's not long before that can get competitive or anxiety-provoking in terms of quantity or quality of food, guests, time, experience, and so on. Jesus is telling this parable about the seating plan of a meal in reaction to his context at that meal. One of the key features in the gospel, we see it there, is that we're told that the lawyers and the religious leaders on that day were watching Jesus closely. But we also see that Jesus is observing closely too, because he notices how they're jostling for position at the meal. The story about seating is profoundly challenging then to that closed, reciprocal system of hospitality, because it insists that fundamentally the invitation is thrown open and asks everyone present to try a different approach to their life. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. This too is open to challenge, of course. Am I being asked to behave in a humble way because it's the best way I know, ultimately, to get the best place? Then this is disingenuous at the very least. But the parable isn't designed to encourage us to want to get on and giving us tips for doing it. It is describing a whole way of living, a whole way of approaching another person. It's a fundamental challenge to our need for status, places of honor, and approval from others who themselves have status. Even when we think we don't need this, there will be small ways every day that we seek this sort of approval because we're needy people. But this parable teaches that whether we human beings will be humbled or exalted is not actually in our hands. This is the action of God and God alone. As Mary sings in the Magnificat, God puts down the mighty and exalts the humble. The interaction between the human and the divine is where humility and exaltation lies. It's therefore not my job to bring another person to heel, to humiliate them. It's not my job either to work out for myself which set of actions will get me the status that I crave. It's not my job to spend time working out if you are higher status than me or not. This parable challenges me that all the energy and time I might spend on that is wasted and I should stop. This parable tells me that the person in front of me, whoever they are, is someone from whom God cannot bear to be parted. Someone that God loves and showers with love, whoever they are, whatever they believe or eat or drink or however they live. This parable demands that I must not judge. In this case, Jesus is challenging those lawyers and leaders to give their hospitality without counting the cost. But fundamentally, this parable is a call to refuse to categorize, to open our hearts, and to risk, to take the risk that our hearts will be broken open, so that, as the poet says, they never close again to the rest of the world. This is so challenging as a way of living that it's hardly possible to contemplate it. That's why Christianity has such a mechanism as confession and forgiveness and absolution, new life, because I need this every minute of every hour of every day. Be compassionate as God is compassionate, says Jesus. Invite all those who will not be able to invite you back. It's a call to give ourselves away. This runs through the beautiful and challenging language of the letter to the Hebrews too, a letter written by an unknown writer about 60 years after Jesus. Show hospitality to strangers, because you will have entertained angels unawares. A strong invitation in Hebrews to live imaginatively and with empathy, simply as a way of living, drawing on examples, in this case, of incarceration, of violence, of the human instinct to make and keep promises in marriage, for example. And that final one, intimately linked with the theme of hospitality in the gospel, keep your lives free from the love of money. This might sound especially challenging when so many this week are consumed by anxiety and worry about money. It's not that we love it, it's that we have no idea how to pay the electricity bill. Don't love money, says the letter. Instead, recognize its power and its potential for showing hospitality. And so, we keep going. We gather in this courtyard, which is both ours at St. James's and also belongs to the city, belongs to everyone who wanders in or looks through. We are both hosts and guests here because Christ invites us in the middle of the city to meet and eat and pray and talk together. Try to figure stuff out as we go along. The artist Fiona Quadri spent 2 days recently having conversations in this courtyard. She came to hang out. Her work is in the garden right now. Do go and see some of the phrases she's chosen to amplify in her art from those conversations had in this courtyard with whoever passed by. On Friday night here, we offered free live Cuban music to anyone who wandered in. And I found myself dancing right here with anyone who turned up. There is in this city, in this parish, despite all these grand buildings, so much loneliness, so much despair and anxiety and dread, fueled by war, by climate crisis, by post-pandemic distresses and fear of the coming cold. The hope offered in this gospel and offered to each of us in this Eucharist has never been more relevant. It's never been more needed, but it's never been more challenging. There is so much to rage against and so much to be in despair about. Yes, bring that to this altar, where the invitation is for you, yes, you, as you are, to find love and connection, joy and strength, and to risk your heart being broken with this way of living. To risk your heart being broken, of course, but broken open so that it never closes again to the rest of the world. Amen.